The way the debate has been framed because of the recession of the 1970s and 80s is that we have too much welfare.
There is a gap between the academia and policy making, but I think that this is why this project is so valuable.
One of the big contributions is that we really would like to sort of change the conception and definition of the welfare state. Well, I think it was invented as an idea in the time of the Great Depression.
But around the corners wind the lengthening bread lines, and a whole new class of citizens appears in American society, the new poor.
Because that's when we realized that the answers we gave, austerity at the time, led to mass unemployment. Mass unemployment, raised the political fortune of fascism, led to the Second World War, and only after the Second World War, the free democracies realized, this kind of market democracy plus a market economy, a capitalist market economy plus democracy has to be mediated by something else that gives people economic security.
When we think of the welfare state, we normally tend to think of those who are on the welfare. So we tend to think of people who are receiving benefits. Whilst I think the challenge nowadays is to understand and somehow recalibrate welfare states to take care of people who are still not on the welfare support, since increasingly we are at the risk of being in that situation due to the contracts, changing contracts, maybe because of globalization or other structural changes or occupational changes.
I mean, many things have changed. I think the most important change is that the welfare state, the way it expanded, was relatively passive in the sense of, if there is a great recession, an economic shock, we buffer the unemployed. And the unemployed at the time were all males. So it was very male breadwinner oriented. Women were supposed to care for the children, were supposed to care for the elderly. And I think the biggest change since the 1980s is sort of the massive influx of women into the labor market. And that changes everything, because it also requires work-life balance policies. It requires early childhood development policies for kids whose mothers are in work. So I think this kind of post-industrialization that happened since the 1980s is the most important. I mean, in the background, there's globalization, there's aging, and making it, in the long run, more difficult to pay for pensions. But that only reinforces the need to have more people in the labor market to finance the welfare state, and also more training and education to raise levels of productivity in order to finance pensions at a later stage.
And the welfare state nowadays, especially in today's knowledge economies, I think is shifting more and more towards activation and capacitation. Whilst in the past, the main focus, and of course still is, the redistributive part of it, taking care of people's consumption, so smoothing consumption over time.
And the most important function of the welfare state is to buffer an economic shock. And so so the welfare state, from this perspective, is much more an insurance device than redistribution. Of course, redistribution is important. For a very active welfare state, you need progressive taxation. But to narrow the definition of the welfare state to pure distribution and redistribution is a huge mistake. But it's everywhere.
So I think that's why this project is so exciting. It's because we work with economists, sociologists, and political scientists, and I think we all contribute differently. I think the sociologists and economists have a more direct contribution towards which policies produce certain effects, so which policies are more or less desirable. Whereas political scientists like me, it's more about thinking in terms, if we know that a certain policy is desirable, under what institutional conditions can this policy, can we sort of be sure that governments would have favorable conditions for implementing such policies?
We have kind of designed the project is in 5 layers. So this is the macro level. We look at OECD statistics to see whether there are dilemmas between equity and efficiency, yes or no, and under what conditions. So that's the first layer. The second layer is to isolate at the micro level risk groups. So there are the long-term unemployed, lone mothers. There's still a lot of child poverty in Europe. So we kind of look at, if there is some good news in the correlations at the macro level, does this trickle down to the micro level? So this is all quantitative. And then we go to the qualitative side. And what we do in the qualitative research project is to kind of find out what kind of trajectories there are there. I mean, the Scandinavian countries moved in this direction much earlier than some of the continental welfare state. The Netherlands, stepped on the bandwagon. Germany stepped on the bandwagon 10 years later than the Netherlands, but may even surpass the Netherlands by now, and so on and so forth. The Southern European countries come in very late, but also because they suffered tremendously from the Great Recession and also from the European choice for austerity. So this is the fourth layer, looking into countries, how they updated their systems of stock flows and buffers, and that's the idea. And then we have a fifth layer, which is also qualitative, and it's more about what is happening at the subnational level. So let's say cities or regions, because the kind of welfare state that we are studying is becoming more service intensive. Long-term care, active labor market policy, early childhood development, and services are not provided at the national level. They're not provided in The Hague or Rome. There's legislation there. So you really have to look into the institutional capabilities of local governments and how local governments operate in active labor market programs with local social partners. I mean, I have these ideas for a long time, but in order to prove them, you need a group and you need resources, and so the ERC grant gave me 1.8 million to do this, and without it I couldn't have done it. And then of course you could say what you want, and people say, yeah, I mean, sounds plausible, but can you prove it? And now I can. So I think that is it's a matter of day and night.
So I think for this research and for research in general, the European University Institute is a unique creation. I think as Europeans we should be grateful for those governments, individuals, universities that somewhere in the 1970s decided to create this space for research and for intellectual development. So for me, the European University is a space that has been created. I mean, here we are in Italy, but I think legally we are not even in Italy here. It's a bit of a strange situation, but in a positive sense, in the sense that the space has been opened to allow all these economists, sociologists, lawyers to think about common problems like we do in the WellSIre project.
Well, the biggest challenge I find that the welfare states in Europe are facing is the influx of precarious contracts, precarious jobs. That is to say that in nowadays societies it is quite a rarity to have a stable, a long-time contract that has set hours and whereby an individual is, let's say, safe in terms of employment. So job precarious contracts is something that is developing independently from the welfare state, but the welfare state has to react to it.
There are many things boiling, and often in these projects, the outputs, at some point there are outputs, but let's say concretely, we are now working on at least one edited volume about these political and institutional factors that facilitate certain patterns of welfare state change. And in the meantime, we are all working on several papers that maybe want to investigate a specific pattern of change. So there is sort of the big picture, which we will describe in sort of an edited volume, and then there are certain sub-aspects that we investigate in research articles.
The group has 4 postdocs who are here on 4-year contracts or 3-year contracts, and 3 PhD students who will write the PhD within the project. And all of us are writing articles that we publish in academic journals, but we're also doing books. And one book will actually come out very soon with Oxford University Press. And it has a nice rhetorical title, Who's Afraid of the Welfare State Now? And so that's the first thing that will come out of this. And then we have ideas for books on the country level and on the regional level. Most of the sociological work will be done in articles. And yes, at the end, in let's say 2.5 years, when some of these things are in production, we have a big conference here for sure.
Working in a diverse group is the best. It's luxury, because we are constantly challenged by the other fields. If we think in our own terms, in our field, we only tackle one part of the puzzle.